the pre-show nonsense.
Well, that's okay, because I think we're officially out of the pre-show, and we're going to move on into the
show.
The show. Hooray.
Welcome, everybody. You're at our panel.
It's really neat.
We are three people who have a beginning YouTube channel called High Score. And we're here to do a panel for you. We've never done this before, and we are mortified, but we are thrilled to have you guys here.
So our coping mechanism is we're going to get really, really nervous sometimes, and when we do, we might hold up a help sign, and when we do, if you wouldn't mind clapping for us, or for anything, it doesn't have to be for us, but just making any noise actually is fine, just so we can move beyond the grief of silence.
Yeah, and it doesnn't have to be sincere.
No. Yeah, actually, the least sincere possible. Can I hear your sincerest? Please help me. That's very good. Very good. Oh, that was excellent. Can I hear your least sincere? So this is like without sincerity.
Oh no.
Yes. You've nailed it. That was perfect. I feel much better.
Everyone's killing it.
Okay, so as we were saying, we run a YouTube channel called High Score, where we talk about video game music. Specifically, we analyze different qualities of video game music, and we're just like huge music nerds and huge video game nerds. My name is Travis, this is Lily, and this is Brendan. We're all based in Oakland and Berkeley area, and it's super fun. So anyway, we wrote a giant script because we're all super nervous, so I'm just going to read from that for a second. Today, we're going to talk about the history of the digital orchestra as told through the narrative of the music of Final Fantasy. We're going to take a look at Uematsu's history for a second. We're also going to look at the battle music, the prelude, and a few select pieces from Final Fantasies 1 through 7. So basically from the Nintendo through the PlayStation 1. And we're going to sort of mark out where the hardware and the sort of musical creativity has come from, and where it's gone, and where it's going. So I hope you guys enjoy it.
And real quick, who is Uematsu?
Nobuo Uematsu is the composer of the music of Final Fantasy. He
kind of looks like Mario. He's super adorable.
Exactly. Let's introduce him. Lily, if you want to take it away.
All right. So Uematsu had no traditional music education, no background in computers, programming, video games. He was working part-time as a music retailer, and he would host these little artist get-togethers at his apartment where people would kind of mingle and network. And he got the idea to apply at Squaresoft through his friend who was there, and he just went for it, and he got the job because it was
he totally thought it was going to be a side job along with his other job of renting musical instruments. And sure enough, it turned into much more than that. Although he had been composing a bunch of music beforehand, he started working at Squaresoft on the Nintendo, and he found that the limitations that the Nintendo sound chip had in terms of what it could and couldn't produce as far as sound and music were this really interesting challenge. And it's through those limitations and that challenge that he actually managed to excel. And he explored the Nintendo sound chip as a compositional tool, rather than as a handicap. Like a lot of people, I think, approach the Nintendo as cool, how do I make this work? How do I get sound to come out of this? And Uematsu was like, yes, how do I play this instrument? And he really explored what the Nintendo was capable of doing.
Yeah. So let's talk about what the Nintendo is capable of doing from kind of a hardware point of view. So the NES sound solution, the developers called it the audio processing unit. It was basically this chip that's actually just a generic Ricoh processor that had some kind of also analog output stuff that it could do. It's interesting. So basically the Nintendo sound solution was a very quirky and limited 4-voice, sort of, digitally controlled synthesizer with a not quite 8-bit digital sampler stuck in. And we'll talk a little more about that. It was very limited, and I think the limitations of the chip resulted in what you think of as the NES sound. I mean, obviously, because the chip is actually making the sound, and all NES games have sort of the same voice in that way because the sound comes from the chip and not from the cartridge, at least the actual sounds that are being generated. That means that if you want to have a voice as a composer, or if you want to bring something that is really just emblematic of your game, you have to be really clever about it, because at the end of the day, everybody's working with these 4 voices and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like everyone's playing the same instrument, and they're all trying to make different music,
Yeah.
which is super interesting.
So here's basically how it worked, and I'll try to make this not too deep in the hardware, mostly because I don't actually understand it. So the music and sound effect instructions for the game actually lived on the cartridge as this music machine language, which is really low-level, almost hardware code. It's basically caveman MIDI. And the code, so you'd stick the cartridge in the console and start up the game, and this code would get dumped into the Nintendo APU. And it would kind of tell it what to do. The APU didn't have any like RAM of its own. It didn't have any storage. So obviously this is always an issue in development, that art and sound are always fighting each other as far as for CPU cycles, and that was also true for the Nintendo. So the APU has very limited stuff that it's asking the CPU to do, and most of it is just kind of coming off the game cart itself. So the actual data in the cartridge would just be telling this little synthesizer on the NES what to do. So there's no actual sound that came on an NES cartridge. And the synthesizer, like I said, had 4 voices. Let's listen to the first.
This is the battle music from
Oh
Final
yeah, I'm
Fantasy
sorry,
I.
I'm getting away from myself because of the script. Okay, so anyway, we had this example that I just totally ran over, but yeah, so like the instructions from the cartridge would be like very complex musical instructions that would tell the sound chip to play some music. That we're all very familiar with, which is great. Or it could be a very simple instructions to just tell it to kind of poop out some sound effects. So those are just kind of little one-offs. So let's look at what the voices could actually do, though, and figure out kind of how this thing made sound. So the APU had a pair of identical pulse wave oscillators, which are basically like a square wave that you can mess with. So this is 2 of the 4 voices we're talking about here. They're exactly the same. They do the same thing. We get 2. So at this point, we can play 2 notes at once, which is very exciting. So the pulse wave oscillator in its sort of standard configuration sounded like this. And the waveform basically looked like that. It's just a square wave. So that little dotted line in the middle would be silence, and the waveform shoots up to max amplitude for half of the wave cycle, and then it shoots down to negative max amplitude for half the cycle and goes back to 0. And that's just a square wave. You could also change the sound of these voices to be different waveforms, but not that different. You could shorten it up. So that's just a slightly different wave shape. It gets a little more buzzy, a little more reedy. And that's yet again an even shorter pulse width coming from the oscillator that gets even more buzzy and reedy and kind of gets those upper harmonics going. So there's a little bit of a palette to play with, but not much. It should also be noted that the waveforms didn't actually look like this. Like if you looked at the output on an oscilloscope, it would look a lot more like this. And that just had to do with the limitations of the analog hardware and also like laws of physics problems of you can't actually have any analog signal or signal in air make a right angle.
Yeah, that's the bane of all musicians and like sonic performers.
Yes,
that physics gets in the way.
It is bullcrap.
Yeah, there's air and stuff, and it's
Physics aren't real.
it's totally unfair.
Yeah. So those were kind of the voices. So there's a little bit of variety there, but not much to play with. Those were the primary melodic voices on the NES. You could do a couple of other things to them. You could do some volume envelopes where you could kind of fade the sound in or out at the beginning of notes to kind of simulate certain sounds. You could also do a little bit of a pitch bend, which you guys are probably familiar in this sound, which is pulse width modulator. I think it's on the 25% waveform setting, and they just tell it to go boing. So you could do some stuff. And I talked about the volume envelope effects, and we can hear those here. Kind of fading in.
This is the second voice in the battle music for Final Fantasy 1.
Yeah. So, and that kind of gets, we're starting to get to the point where we're taking kind of a bleep bloop sound. I'll play that square wave again. You know, we're taking that, which sounds like a real primitive kind of chiptune situation. And with that kind of envelope sound, it's starting to sound a little more like an instrument, you know? So you can coax some interesting things from it. And the last thing that you could do is you could actually adjust the pulse width on the fly and get a sound kind of like this. That fuzzy. And now it's back to normal. Did you guys heard the difference in the beginning there? That's super cool. So those were, and that's it. So if you're writing melodies on the NES, you had 2 of those to play with. So it's really impressively limited, and so it just makes the fact that some of this music sounds really good, it makes it that much more impressive that we ever even got there. Yeah. So, sorry, I just totally like obliterated the script.